Hello, I'm Fiona Orford-Williams. I'm a director at Edison Group, and ahead of International Women's Day, we thought we'd actually ask some of the most prominent names in the investment field about their views on investment styles and investment markets, and what we might be missing in terms of addressing those requirements. As I say, I've got a really illustrious and probably industrious panel here with me today. Um, let I will let them introduce themselves briefly. Let's start with you, Annabel.
Yeah, I'm Annabel Brodie-Smith. I'm the Communications Director of the Association of Investment Companies. That's the trade association that represents investment trusts, VCTs, closed-ended funds. I have been there for approaching 28 years, so a very long time. And it's my role to communicate the benefits of investing and investment trusts to private investors and our various audiences. I think I should also say that I'm very passionate about diversity. I'm a director, an ambassador of Women on Boards, and I'm an ambassador of the Diversity Project.
Excellent. Super person to have on the panel in that case. Louise, do you just want to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course, Fiona. Thank you. So, hello everyone. I'm Louise Bryant. I am head of investor relations at Trustpilot. I've been with the business only about a year, actually, but I've spent the last 15 years in investor relations roles across FTSE 100 and 250s. And prior to that was actually an equity research analyst at one of the US investment banks. So like Annabel, I'm very passionate about diversity and in particular trying to help women succeed in what certainly at times feels like a very male-dominated world. So thank you for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Rosemary.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm Rosemary Banyard. I'm a fund manager at Downing, where I run an all-cap UK equity open-ended fund. And I've been a fund manager for over 30 years, specialising in investing in listed UK mid and small cap companies. It's an area that I find gives endless interest every day. When I turn on my screen, I find that companies are announcing new and interesting things. I have the privilege of talking to people who run businesses, and I'd love to have more women have the enthusiasm for it that I have.
Excellent. Thank you. And Emma.
I'm Emma Moriarty. I'm a portfolio manager at CG Asset Management, and I specifically manage their range of inflation-linked government bond funds. I've been here for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I worked at the Bank of England as a senior economist in the financial stability area. I absolutely love working in the world of investments, and I'm really keen to open up the doors to more female investors.
Thank you. And Chloe.
Hi everyone, I'm Chloe Wong. I just joined Edison in December. So this is the start of my career and I'm a graduate equity research trainee. I was at LSE for my studies in management and I'm excited to hear about what everyone has to say.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm sure you appreciate what a luxury it is to have such an informed and articulate panel with us. So can I start maybe with Rosemary? Do you think it's true that investment styles vary by gender?
Fiona, I'm going to say I suspect it is. I'm not sure how much research, academic or otherwise, has been done on the subject. So I'm not qualified to say. But and it is a generalization. I think that the women I come across, and I myself actually tend to be a bit more cautious in how we invest, and certainly speaking for myself, and having worked closely with male investors, I'd say definitely more risk averse, perhaps longer term, and possibly those two things go together. It's just difficult, isn't it? Because I feel I'm generalizing without the
Always the danger.
without the evidence. But I think one piece of evidence that is indicative is that I believe there are a lot more, proportionately, a lot more women who have investments in cash ISAs than men, and I think that tells you something.
Mm-hmm. Does that align with your experience, Emma?
Yeah, I think that's right. And again, a lot of this is anecdotal, but it does seem to be the case that women tend to be, well, on one hand, women are actually very good at saving money and do put a lot of money aside. And this is sort of, the evidence of this is just the scale of these, mounting cash ISAs. On the other hand, I think women can be far more cautious, more risk averse, tend to take much more of a long-term buy and hold type strategy. But in some ways, I think what that shows is it's a fantastic opportunity because this is exactly the group that you want to be targeting for some of these long-term, very diversified, more equity-like investment products.
Well, I would, from the sound of that, it sounds that it's the perfect, the investment trusts and investment companies are the perfect vehicle for this style of investing. Is that what you see from your end, Annabel?
Well, they absolutely are, because they are all about investing for the long term, and their approach with a fixed pool of capital, which allows fund managers to take a long-term view of their investments and they're never forced sellers, really demonstrates this. So I think they are really well suited they're all well suited to all investors, but I think particularly to women. And I'm just going to say that my experience is when we asked younger investors for adjectives to describe how they feel about investing, 30% of men said they felt calm about investing. And these are investors, whereas just 13% of women felt calm. And I think, this sort of difference in attitude, when we asked non-investors their emotions, 32% of men were excited about investing, whereas only 12% of women were excited. And I think this sort of sums up the problem, really. We need to get more women interested in investment. I think you can say actually that women are probably sensible in their attitude. They're not, not getting overexcited. They're more cautious. They're taking a balanced approach. But we need to convince them that investing is for them.
So why are we not managing to do so?
Well, we are working on it here, quite honestly. That's why we're sitting here right now.
Absolutely.
We are clearly working on it. I think we need to make sure we use, and this is for all investors, that language that's not overly complicated, not overly technical. I think we have to convey that what investing is really about, that it's a long-term approach, putting you and your family in a future-proof, financially secure position. It's not about day trading, cryptocurrency, sort of tech bros. That is not what investing is about. And I think it's slightly, people get the wrong impression from that sort of attitude. Investment trusts are for the long term. They allow investors to invest in a range of assets. So you have access to one company, but it will be invested underlying in a range of assets, from equities but also other assets like property or unquoted companies, and they deliver strong income. So you're getting that income as well, which is a benefit that if you reinvest it, obviously that's really helpful. So I think we just need to get that message across. We need to do it in a simple and sensible way, which is not patronizing.
Yes, absolutely. Maybe we can bring Louise in as well. Do you see any divergence between the type of questions you get asked as an investment relations officer between different fund managers, male and female?
Yeah, I think there is definitely some difference. It obviously depends slightly on the fund, whether it's a shorter term hedge fund or a longer term investor. But what I have typically noticed is that there are fewer women in hedge funds, which is the shorter term type roles versus the kind of long term institutional investors. And typically, I would say more of the women will ask longer term questions. So, sort of echoing what Rosemary was saying at the beginning, they're more interested in long term prospects. And I'd say generally are less risk averse. So, they want to understand the risk associated with the business in equal measure to the opportunities, whereas a lot of the men will perhaps focus more on the kind of opportunity set. Now, I'm making huge generalizations here, so I wouldn't want to cast aspersions on the outliers. But I think there is a difference. The other area I find fascinating is you'll often go into an investor meeting and you'll ask them to explain a bit about their fund. And you typically hear, oh, we're a long-term investor. And when you dig into it, long-term to them is sort of 2 to 3 years. Well, from where I sit, that's not long term. I want 5 years plus. So there is definitely a kind of perhaps misalignment, politely put, between how people think about things across the industry.
Yes, certainly. I mean, Emma, do you find that you're asking different questions from other people in meetings?
Yes, I mean, I think it probably is the case. I think, I can identify with a lot of the things that Louise says, that, I think it's definitely, some of it will be my career background. I was a macroeconomist in financial stability. I was sort of paid to think about things that would go wrong. So it is definitely, one of my first instincts to think, what are the things that might go wrong here? But in some ways, I don't think, all of this is just different investment styles, because I think so fundamental to thinking about what is the investment thesis for any investment product is, what things need to be true for this to succeed and for this to make money. So in one respect, well, yes, it's definitely a different style. I think it's also really important to communicate for women who are looking to get into investments that this is actually a really important part of the investing process, is understanding the risks and what you need to be true and what you need to believe in for this investment to make money.
So how do we become more visible to those potential entrants to the industry? Who should we give that? Maybe Rosemary first on that one.
Well, it's challenging. So one thing that I've done recently with my colleague Judith Mackenzie at Downing is we put together a series of podcasts, actually 8 in total, on a podcast called fundyourretirement.com. And setting our stall out quite clearly, this series is called Investing for the Longer Term. And in it, we discuss, with one another, various aspects of fund management. So what we do all day, what have been our investing mistakes as well as our successes. We discuss things on it like, what happens when we have a company in and we meet the management. What is an annual general meeting, and how might we vote? And we felt that there are lots of podcasts out there, we know that, but we just wanted to put our two women in discussing and trying not to use too much jargon, trying to make this accessible to people, so that they just have a better concept of what a fund manager does all day and what the job involves. So it's not promoting our products at all. It's absolutely intended to educate. And I think that we all need to find ways to, as we are able to, just to try and educate more.
Yeah. Well, that's something you've been very active in, Annabel, isn't it? So do you want to just tell us a little bit about the diversity efforts that you've been making?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the AIC are very keen to encourage more women, more private investors to start investing and find out more about investment trusts. We have actually running right now a campaign. It's called our Future Proof Your Family campaign. It's aimed at men and women, private investors, people who want to find out more about investing in investment trusts. And we literally take them through on our website, theaic.co.uk/family, to a very simple page where it explains about using investment trust for ISAs. It explains what an investment trust is. It talks about perhaps saving for children, the different elements of investment trusts in terms of what they can be used for and what they are in a very simple way. So, that's one of the things we've been doing. But obviously, we at the AIC have been involved in trying to encourage more women to come into our industry. I'm pleased to say, if we went back nearly 28 years ago, when I joined the AIC, there were very few female directors. There were very few female fund managers. I have to say, I have known Rosemary a very long time, just to manage an investment trust. But there were very few female managers. We have got to a stage where there are more female fund managers, but we've got to do more on that. There are around still only about 12% of investment trusts are managed by women. I have to say that we've done a lot better on directors. We now have 42% of our directors are women. But I think it is, obviously we want to go out, we want to educate, we want to create an investment culture. But I do think it's also important that we have role models within the industry.
Absolutely. And you're also involved in something called the Diversity Project, is that right?
Yes, I'm an ambassador for the Diversity Project. Now, the Diversity Project has different streams of activity. The gender stream has got this great program going called Pathway, which is to encourage, help women become fund managers and progress their career in fund management. And that's one element of the Diversity Project's work. But they also have a whole range of other streams of work, from looking at issues like obviously ethnic diversity, people returning to work after having some time off, to carers, a whole range. And they're trying to make sure that financial services embraces diversity and that diverse people actually, a whole range of people want to work in our industry, and you can come to work as yourself.
Yes, that's very important. Now, let's just have a think then about the messaging and how we are communicating with the wider world. If I come back to you, Louise, how conscious are you when you're doing your drafting your releases and arranging your external reach? How conscious are you of the different audiences and the different needs that they have?
So I'm quite conscious in the area of different investors, but not probably in terms of diversity. And that's actually a really interesting thought. Could one tailor one's release more to a particular audience in that regard? But certainly we think about, we want to attract long-term investors, and therefore we're trying to highlight more of the kind of long-term actions that we're taking within the business and demonstrating that we're delivering against those over time, rather than always trying to be kind of short-term and reactive. Even if sometimes that means, talking about difficult things or making difficult decisions, it's far better to, take those difficult decisions if they're in the interest of the business longer term and explain why you're doing it. But I've never actually thought about doing it from could you tailor it by gender or by particular ethnic group or something. It's an interesting thought. I'm not quite sure how you would do it. I think perhaps it's more about how you cut it down, and when you're doing things like creating short investor videos off the back of results, could you tailor those perhaps a bit more? I think more broadly, the finance industry, there's a huge amount on kind of social media and stuff, and perhaps Chloe would have a perspective here that it's very much about kind of the finance bros, and it's very male dominated and very kind of quite aggressive actually. And I think we're kind of missing a trick in that there isn't the balance to that from a female perspective. And it hasn't helped that, the media have lambasted finance for the last 15, 20 years. So it does make it more difficult to make it an attractive industry. But I do think there are things that we could probably do to start to appeal more to a younger generation of women.
Absolutely. Just anecdotally, I asked an AI engine to profile me, a UK equity investment manager, and yes, it fitted very much with with those preconception biases. So let's hear from Chloe. You're just coming into the city. Can you tell us about how you became interested and what you hope to achieve?
Yeah, sure. So I first became interested in finance. Well, I think it comes from the fact that I went to LSE, and there's a very big focus within that university on pursuing a finance career. So I think that was very encouraging for me to be in an environment where the males and females would go into finance careers. And that's what initially got me looking into these roles. And I think now, because of social media, you have all these influencers on TikTok, on Instagram, talking about women in finance and how to start investing. I see a lot of that on my contents page on my feed about how to get started into investing. And I think that's a really good move, and it has encouraged me to start looking into investing. So I think those are really positive movements. And Louise, for what you were saying about the finance bros, yes, I think that is very true that there is not a counter for that, like for the female side. What I do see is the rise of the girl boss, which is this very empowering kind of girl like stereotype that you would go into now, which is as a girl, you want to have a very strong career, you want to be financially independent, and you really focus on your career. So there are a lot of positive movements in social media at the moment.
Thank you. Let's bring it back to Emma now. Are you do you feel that as a group we're adequately reaching out to potential female recruits into the industry, and are we starting early enough to get their interest?
I think that actually goes to the heart of the issue, because I think what we need to be really actively focused on is building out a pipeline. And as Annabel mentioned, there's been so much work done to get women on investment trust boards. I think one of the next steps is to have more female fund managers sort of visibly, and the thing that you have to do is really start building the pipeline early. And I think that means sort of engaging at schools, engaging in universities, and making sure that people think about this career when they're doing their A-levels, when they're at university, building out their CV. It's definitely true that we want to encourage even a diversity of academic backgrounds into investing. I think it's important to get different perspectives, but it's also studying some subjects definitely makes it easier. So I think the message needs to land very early at that point. And then I think the second thing that's helpful is, as Chloe was mentioning, there's a sort of human side to this, which I think is useful, which is sort of, I think people's career stories are actually very powerful. Being able to sort of see someone doing the job and, personalize it a little bit, what is that person like? How did they get there? And sort of communicating more clearly that there's not one stereotype for who ends up in finance, and here's this person who maybe looks a little bit more like me and I could do that too. And then I think the other thing is, like, it's broader than just fund management. Investments is such a wide industry, and there's so many different types of roles and people who suit different jobs. So it may not be fund management, it might be trading, or it might be research or investor relations or sales, and there are so many careers, and it's just about bringing diversity into a wide range of roles.
That's really interesting. It might be just worth having a run round the room and just find out how we all got to where we got to. So do you want to start that, Emma? How did you get into your role?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, to this point of, we need to start this early. I didn't even know what a fund manager was until I was right at the end of my university career. And, even then, it wasn't until a few years ago that I actually thought I could be one. So I studied law and economics, and I went into a central bank for 8 years, worked on financial stability. And towards the end of that, my role focused on financial market risks and working on devising some of the market interventions that took place during the COVID pandemic. And when I did that, I sort of started to realize that, as well as doing this job, it might actually be really interesting to be a participant in these markets and to be an investor. And then the role that I have now at CG fit really well with that, because it's a multi-asset investment house, but also one with a very macroeconomically focused mandate. So it sort of combined my love of macroeconomics with my interest in financial markets, and that's how I got to it. But it was definitely, I went through a different career first before I got here.
Yeah, absolutely. Annabel, what about you? How did you get?
Right. Well, and then I did a master's actually in geography in the US. And I came back and I knew I was always really interested in markets, actually. I always felt, everything influenced them, politics, economics, even the news, everything had an impact on markets. And it seemed to, to me, investment itself, that appealed to me because I thought even someone like me, I can participate in this. And one day I want to retire and I can save for my retirement. So I was very interested in investment and markets. I ended up doing a PR course. I worked for 1 year for a big PR agency called Hill & Knowlton in London. And then I applied for a job at what was at the time the Association of Investment Companies. It had a different name at the time. I didn't even know what an investment company was when I applied. I had to teach myself pretty quickly by learning it on their website before I came along for the interview. And I have to say, in a way, the rest is history. I joined, as I said, nearly 28 years ago. And I found it a really fascinating career. I meet so many different people, fund managers, journalists, wealth managers, financial advisors. It's a really diverse group of people. And if you're at the Trade Association, it's great because you're sort of at the center of all of that. And you can sort of steer the industry in the direction. And obviously, I've done a lot of work on diversity within the investment trust industry.
Absolutely. Louise, did you hanker after a career in the city from an early age?
No, growing up, I wanted to be a vet, so completely different. But in the end, I read economics and geography at university. and wasn't quite sure what to do afterwards. I did an internship at an investment bank between my second and third year of university, and decided very quickly that I didn't want to be an investment banker, but I'd spent a day on the trading floor and I thought, oh, this is quite fun, quite exciting. I'd like to be part of that. But I actually trained as an accountant, so I'm a qualified accountant, and then used that to get into equity research with a view that maybe in future I could move on to the trading floor. I had never heard of investor relations before I was an equity analyst. And actually, having spent time on the trading floor, they're another very male-dominated environment where you have to be pretty robust. And I could give as good as I got, but I realized actually I didn't think it wasn't an environment I would thrive in. And so the opportunity came across to move corporate side. And so that's how I did it. But I certainly never imagined I'd be here when I was a teenager.
And what about you, Rosemary?
So I'd say echoes of what Emma was saying. So I think I got to virtually graduation day at university without knowing anything whatsoever about the city and financial markets. I actually read classics, Latin and Greek, for my first degree, and I had not a clue what I was going to do with it, but I knew I didn't want to teach it, and I knew that I didn't want to stay in academia. And actually, what specifically happened was that on graduation day, another girl at my college said to me, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, I've got a job in a stockbroking firm doing investment research. Why don't you go and research that? You might find it interesting. And that conversation was actually what led to the entirety of my career. And I'm not sure she even knows it or ever knew it. And actually, she went off to a firm called W.I. Carr in the Far East and remained, I think, in stockbroking. And I, yes, went into stockbroking initially in the sort of private client world, which is quite a good way to learn a wide range of aspects of investing, because you're dealing with people, some of whom might want bonds, some of them might want shares, some of them, other things, the sort of tax implications. So you get to know, you have quite a rounded experience. And then I moved into equity research from there. And then it was much later, I thought, well, you know what, I don't want to keep just researching one industry. I'd like to look at lots. And actually, rather than sort of suggesting what fund managers should do, I quite like to do it myself. And I think a lot of people go that route and come to that position. I just wanted to add to something Emma said, thinking about how we reach people. So my college at Cambridge University, Clare College, it's quite interesting that a male fund manager called Angus Tulloch, who is retired, but he was a famous manager in Asian markets. He actually gifted an amount of money to Clare to set up something called the Cutty Sark Society. I don't know why it's called that, but it's for women undergraduates, and they actually manage this pot of money on behalf of the college. And I would love to think that other universities could set up something similar. And they, so they meet, they put forward to one another investment ideas, and I think they, Angus and other people coach them in understanding how to analyze a company, and then they make investment decisions, and then the next generation of undergrads comes along and takes it on. I think that's a marvelous idea.
Has anybody else got any initiatives that they've got planned or under action that are going to improve our gender balance?
Not a specific initiative, but I think one thing that I've become acutely aware of as I've progressed through my career is actually the lack of role models. And so anything we can do in terms of finding role models, but also then in being very honest about what it takes as a woman and the compromises that you have to make. and any tools that they have to use. So it's, you know, it's wonderful to see a female CFO. I've worked for a female CFO and she's amazing. And I would always count her as a role model. But when you dig into it, you know, she was traveling so much that her husband had to be at home all the time. And so there are compromises made. And I don't think I was certainly brought up as a generation, as a woman, that you could have it all. And the reality is that you can't. You have to make compromises somewhere. And I think perhaps we're doing younger generation a disservice if we don't own that and aren't honest about the things that we have to do or the tools that we have to put in place in order to make that very clear. Full transparency, I have 3 children. I have a full-time nanny. It's the only way I can make it work. But I've worked in companies where the entire exec team had partners that didn't work because that was the only way that they could kind of juggle the job. Now that was men and women. And I think that's really dispiriting actually in many ways. And people perhaps aren't always fully honest about that. And I think some transparency and honesty would be hugely helpful.
No, actually, I'd like to make a comment on that, actually, because I think we talked before about the importance of having a pipeline of young people, young women coming into the industry. But I think the point you raise, and I think it's a very important one, is it's important that we keep the women that we have in the industry. We need better maternity and paternity policies for both genders. Quite honestly, we need support, flexible working. Hopefully, this whole working from home trend should be helpful in enabling women to stay within our industry. But, I think we need supportive and sensible companies to help us through this process. And the other thing is, I think it's important that women realise that, I think it's great you've got a full-time nanny. I have to say, I don't think you should feel at all guilty about that. I think that's brilliant. I have always had a nanny until my children were of a sufficient age where we could manage without one. Somebody has to be there to do that child support, and it definitely doesn't have to be a woman. And maybe I'm too eternally optimistic because I think you can have it all, actually. I really do.
I hope you're right.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts from anybody else?
Well, I had a husband who wanted to set up a business, and so he in the early stages it was an internet business in the early days of that, and so we sort of swapped, and that was how I managed it. But I always say, and I absolutely couldn't have done it without having the husband who was willing to sort of pick the children up from school and things like that. Yeah.
I think, Rosemary, you've made a good point there. The point is marry well. Get a good
marry
husband
well.
who can help you out with the domestic side of life.
Yeah, marry wisely, I think is the...
Well, wisely, not necessarily financially, but definitely you need that help, don't you?
Yeah, I think it's important, Annabel, actually. So, as with all things, if you're going to marry or make a long-term commitment, is to say up front what your aspirations are.
Yeah.
So there aren't too many surprises somewhere down the track.
Yes, it's about having a support network around you, isn't it? Frankly, but I think the general tenor is that we need to make sure that we go along the lines of just making sure that people can see it to be it principle is just vitally important. I think this has been a really interesting and valuable discussion. I'm very grateful to you all for your time, and hopefully this is not the end of the story. Thank you so much for being with us.